Why is she still smiling? After what we said, she should know better. Claire Whitmore's voice rang across the marble foyer with the kind of polished cruelty that never needed to shout to be heard. Every housekeeper, server, and driver within earshot went still. Even the grandfather clock near the staircase seemed to hold its breath. Lena Brooks had been kneeling by the front entry, gloved hands collecting the jagged sparkle of a broken crystal vase from the floor when the words landed. She did not look up right away. She simply lifted the largest shard with 2 fingers, set it carefully into the silver dustpan, and kept working as though humiliation were just another mess rich people left for someone else to clean. Morning light spilled through the 12-foot windows in long pale stripes, cutting across the black and white tile and turning the cleaning water in her bucket to liquid gold. The foyer smelled faintly of lemon polish, damp roses, and the sharp, clean sting of bleach. Somewhere deeper in the house, a coffee machine hissed. Above Lena, on the curved staircase wrapped in white banisters and silence, a little girl stood in a navy cardigan with one hand resting on the rail. Emma Whitmore had not said a full sentence in almost a year, but her eyes missed nothing. She watched Lena the way children watch storms through glass, not sure if they are dangerous or beautiful. Claire crossed her arms and tilted her head, the diamonds at her ears catching the light. She wore cream slacks, a silk blouse, and the expression of a woman who had never once wondered what her words cost other people. "You can stop pretending," she said, sweet as iced tea and twice as cold. "No one smiles like that unless they want something." A few feet away, one of the younger maids lowered her gaze to the floor. The driver by the front door adjusted his cap and looked away. No one spoke for Lena. No one ever did. But Lena finally rose, slow and steady. A slim woman in a charcoal cleaning uniform with a name tag that had begun to fade at the corners. Her knees cracked softly from the tile. She set the dustpan on the console table, then reached for the mop beside her cart. Her face was calm, almost gentle, with tired eyes that somehow still carried light. And there it was again, that small smile, not bright enough to challenge anyone, not weak enough to disappear. It rested on her mouth like a candle shielded by 2 hands. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Lena said quietly. Just that. No defense. No edge. No apology. Claire let out a dry laugh. "See? Creepy." Lena dipped the mop into fresh water and twisted it with practiced wrists. Her reflection trembled across the glossy floor beneath her shoes. Up on the staircase, Emma's fingers tightened around the railing. She had heard adults use sharp voices before. Since her mother's funeral, sharp voices had become part of the house the way chandeliers and locked doors were part of the house. But this was different. The woman in the foyer had been cut, and somehow she was the only one not bleeding. Lena moved forward, drawing the mop in smooth, patient lines over the marble, erasing footprints, rosewater stains, and the shadow where the vase had shattered. She passed beneath the staircase without looking up, but Emma caught the faintest scent of soap and peppermint when she did. Clean. Quiet. Safe. In the dining room beyond, staff were already setting silver for a luncheon no one would enjoy. Outside, a black SUV rolled through the gates. Inside, Lena kept smiling as if the morning had not tried to shame it out of her. Emma watched that smile follow her across the floor like a small, warm thing refusing to die. And for the first time in months, the little girl leaned 1 inch farther over the banister to see where it would go. The front door opened before anyone could answer the sound of the SUV outside, and a gust of cold spring air slipped into the foyer carrying the smell of rain, engine heat, and wet asphalt. Daniel Whitmore stepped in with a phone in one hand and a leather folder under his arm, tall, clean-cut, and already tired in the way only powerful men could be tired, as if rest were something that happened to other people. His charcoal suit still held the sharp lines of the city, but his face looked older than the morning. He gave Claire a brief glance, then the staff, then the floor Lena had nearly finished restoring to a glassy shine. "The investors moved lunch up by 40 minutes, he said, not loudly yet. Everyone straightened. "The east dining room needs to be ready by 11:30. No press near the south entrance. And someone please remove those lilies from the library before Emma sees them." He stopped there, just for a breath. The last sentence had come out different. Not softer exactly, but lower, like something weighed it down. Claire's expression shifted at once, cruelty put away behind polished family concern. Of course, she said. I was just telling the staff we need a certain standard today. Daniel barely nodded. He was already moving toward the staircase when his eyes flicked upward and found Emma standing still on the landing in her navy cardigan, pale in the wide wash of daylight. For a second, the whole house narrowed around that look. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said. Emma did not answer. She did not move. Her small hand stayed wrapped around the railing. Daniel waited one beat too long, then gave the kind of almost smile adults wear when they're trying not to show a bruise that nobody can see. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than to her, and turned away. Lena lowered her eyes to the mop handle, but she had seen it. She always saw it, the tiny flinch in a parent's face, the one that came when hope knocked and no one opened the door. She guided the mop bucket toward the side hall, wheels squeaking softly over the tile, and continued into the breakfast room where sunlight pooled across a long walnut table set for people too busy to taste what they ate. A silver tray of untouched fruit sat beneath a dome cover. One chair at the far end remained slightly angled out, as though someone had left in the middle of a sentence months ago and never returned to finish it. Lena began her work the way she always did, not with hurry, but with care. She straightened a folded linen napkin someone had placed half an inch off center. She turned a water glass so the etched crest faced outward. She lifted a framed crayon drawing from a sideboard before dusting beneath it, then set it back down exactly where it had been. A house like this noticed polish, symmetry, silence. It rarely noticed tenderness, so Lena tucked hers into details. In the kitchen, the pastry chef muttered about timing while a dishwasher rattled like distant thunder. Staff crossed one another with clipboards, trays, polished shoes, lowered voices. Lena passed through them like steady music no one admitted they needed. When she reached the library, she found the lilies Daniel had mentioned, tall white stems arranged near the fireplace, their perfume thick and sweet enough to turn memory into something physical. On the reading chaise nearby lay a child's sweater folded in a careful square, as if waiting for a girl who had once left it there and stopped coming back. Lena stood still for one moment, just one, then carried the vase toward the service door. As she passed the threshold, she noticed a figure at the end of the hallway. Emma again, quiet as dust. Watching, Lena did not speak at first. She only lowered the vase to the console table beside her and reached into the pocket of her apron for a peppermint wrapped in clear paper. She placed it near the edge of the table, close enough to be found, far enough not to feel like pressure. Then she returned to the lilies and walked on. Behind her, she heard no footsteps, no voice, nothing at all. But a few seconds later, when she glanced back through the beveled glass of the swinging door, the peppermint was gone. By 11 o'clock the house had become all movement and no warmth, the kind of polished rush that made silver gleam and people disappear at the same time. In the east dining room, sunlight poured through tall windows and flashed against rows of crystal glasses lined so perfectly they looked untouched by human hands. Lena moved between them with a folded cloth and a bottle of polish, her cart tucked near the wall, her steps soft against the dark oak floor. From the kitchen doorway came the clatter of serving spoons, the low panic of timing, the smell of browned butter and rosemary. Somewhere down the hall Claire was giving instructions in that smooth, cutting voice of hers, and farther off a man from security spoke into an earpiece about arriving cars. The whole estate seemed to hum around money, schedules, and appearances. But in the middle of it, Lena noticed what no one else did. One place setting near the end of the table had been arranged for Emma, smaller fork, smaller napkin ring, even a crystal water glass with a blue ribbon tied discreetly around the stem. No one had said the child would come down. No one expected she would. Still, the place had been set because this family believed in maintaining the shape of normal even after normal was gone. Lena stood there a moment, looking at the blue ribbon catching the light, then reached out and turned the glass a fraction so the ribbon faced the chair. A useless kindness, maybe, but sometimes the smallest things were the only things grief allowed. She was wiping the sideboard when she saw it, not directly, but in the long reflection of the window glass. A thin figure in navy, just beyond the doorway. Emma again, half hidden, watching with those wide, careful eyes. Lena did not turn right away. She finished wiping the wood in slow circles, then took a linen napkin from the stack and folded it once, twice, and again, her hands moving with quiet certainty until a little shape appeared. Not perfect, not fancy, just a simple paper-thin bowl made of white cloth. She set it beside the blue ribbon glass and stepped away. In the reflection, Emma did not leave. Lena pretended not to notice and rolled her cart into the sunroom instead, where potted lemon trees stood near the panes and the air smelled green and clean. On the center table lay a child's sketchpad open to a page covered in gray crayon clouds. No names, no faces, just clouds pressing low over a stick house with one dark square for a window. Lena looked at it, then at the cup of colored pencils beside it. She chose the yellow one, hesitated, and added a very small sun in the top corner, no bigger than a quarter, with a few careful rays stretching out into the gray. Then she set the pencil back exactly where she had found it and continued dusting the leaves of the lemon trees one by one. A few minutes later, as she passed the sunroom again with fresh towels over her arm, the sketchpad was gone. So was the yellow pencil. At noon, the first black sedans began pulling into the circular drive, their doors opening to polished shoes and expensive coats, and voices drifted into the foyer like cold air. Lena crossed the upper hall with a basket of fresh hand towels just as Daniel came out of his study. Jaw tight, tie straight, every inch the man the world expected him to be. He stopped when he saw something on the console table outside Emma's room. A peppermint wrapper, carefully folded. Beside it sat the white cloth bowl from the dining room, now a little crushed, as if it had been held in a small fist for a long time. Daniel stared at those two tiny things as if they had no business being there. Then he lifted his eyes and looked down the hall toward Lena. She lowered her gaze at once and kept walking, but before she turned the corner, she heard the study door open behind him and Claire say, sharp with disbelief, "Please do not tell me she is encouraging this." Lena did not slow down. She only held the towels a little closer and kept her face calm. But behind the calm, something in the house had shifted, small as a breath, real as light under a door. The luncheon began with the kind of elegance that looked effortless only because half a dozen invisible people were working to keep it that way. Crystal caught the noon light. Silver chimed softly against china. Low voices floated through the east dining room in measured waves about markets, zoning, expansion, and risk, while outside the windows the first drops of rain tapped against the glass in a pattern too gentle to interrupt anyone important. Daniel Whitmore sat at the head of the table, composed from a distance, but up close there was a strain around his mouth that no tailored suit could hide. Twice he glanced toward the doorway, as if expecting a small figure in a navy cardigan to appear, and twice the doorway remained empty. Claire noticed, of course. She noticed everything except what mattered. "Emma is having a quiet day," she said smoothly when one of the guests asked whether Daniel's daughter would be joining them for dessert. "She has been through so much. We are trying to keep the house calm." Daniel gave a polite nod, but his hand tightened around the stem of his water glass. Lena saw it from the service station beside the wall, where she stood with a silver pitcher and a folded napkin over one arm, still as furniture, present enough to be useful, invisible enough to be ignored. She moved only when needed, refilling a glass here, clearing a plate there, catching the small details that made wealth look graceful. A spoon placed too far from a saucer. A drop of dressing near a charger plate. A guest's cuff brushing the butter dish. No one thanked her. That was normal. But when she passed behind Daniel to collect a bread plate, she saw something else on the table in front of him, nearly hidden beneath a folder of notes. A child's drawing torn from a sketchpad. Gray clouds. A little house. And in the top corner, a small yellow sun. His thumb rested against the edge of the paper as though he had been carrying it longer than an ordinary business lunch could explain. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. By the time coffee was served, the rain had thickened into a silver curtain beyond the windows, and the house had settled into that strange midday hush that comes after performance, when guests are still talking but everyone can feel the effort beginning to fray. When the last sedan finally pulled away from the circular drive, Daniel returned to his study without removing his jacket. Claire went upstairs to check on Emma, and returned less than 2 minutes later with irritation already rising in her face. "She will not open the door," she said from the hall. Again, Daniel looked up from his desk, slow and tired. "Did you try speaking to her gently?" Claire let out a brittle laugh. "Daniel, she has been locked in that room since breakfast. At some point this stops being grief and becomes indulgence." The silence that followed was cold enough to sharpen. Lena had been passing the study with a tray of empty cups when the words reached her through the half-open door. She did not mean to hear what came next, but Daniel's voice carried anyway, rougher than usual, stripped of all the polish he wore for the world. Do not call my daughter an indulgence. The tray in Lena's hands seemed suddenly heavier. For one breath, the entire upstairs hall went still. Then Claire exhaled, offended more than ashamed. I am trying to help, she said. Then help without making her smaller, Daniel replied. Lena kept walking. She took the cups downstairs, rinsed them in the pantry sink, and returned with fresh hand towels for the second-floor bath. As she stepped into the upper hall again, she heard it, not loud, not dramatic, just a sound so small it almost disappeared beneath the rain. A child crying behind a closed bedroom door. Not the sharp cry of anger, not the restless cry of boredom. This was quieter than that, the kind that sounded as if it had learned not to expect anyone to come. Lena stopped outside Emma's room with the folded towels in her arms and listened to the soft, broken rhythm on the other side of the wood. The hallway smelled of linen spray and rain drifting through old window frames. From downstairs came the distant hum of the dishwasher and the muted clink of staff returning the house to order. Lena looked at the brass doorknob, then down at the towel draped over her forearm, plain white cotton, warm from the dryer. Slowly, without making a sound, she knelt beside the door, set the towels on the carpet, and with careful fingers folded the smallest one into a tiny sun with rounded corners and soft flared edges. She placed it against the base of the door where it could be seen from inside, then rose and walked away before anyone could stop her, leaving only the faint scent of peppermint and clean cotton behind. For the rest of the afternoon, the rain stayed over the estate like a gray thought no one could shake. It softened the lawns, blurred the long iron gates, and turned every window in the house into a mirror. Lena moved through her duties with the same quiet rhythm she always carried, changing hand towels in the guest bath, emptying wastebaskets in the upstairs study alcove, straightening the stack of mail near the sunroom door. But some part of her attention remained fixed on the second-floor hallway, on the white towel she had folded into a sun and left outside Emma's room, on the small broken crying she had heard from the other side of the door. She told herself not to expect anything. Children in pain did not heal because someone left softness at the threshold. Still, when she passed the room again with a basket of fresh linens balanced on one hip, she glanced down before she could stop herself. The towel sun was gone. Lena did not pause. She only kept walking, steady and silent, though something warm moved through her chest like a match struck in the dark. An hour later she was in the upstairs sitting room dusting the narrow shelf beneath a row of framed photographs, all silver edges and expensive memories. There was Daniel at a charity gala, handshakes and flashbulbs. Daniel on a sailboat, smiling with people who looked practiced at smiling back. Then one older photo, less polished than the others. A woman in jeans sitting cross-legged on the grass with Emma as a toddler in her lap, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Lena lifted that one carefully to wipe beneath it, and when she set it down again, she noticed movement in the doorway behind her. Emma stood there in stocking feet, cardigan buttoned wrong, hair falling loose over one shoulder. In her hands, she held the little towel sun, no longer neatly shaped, its corners softened and pressed from being handled again and again. Lena straightened slowly, not enough to startle her. The room smelled of wood polish and the faint citrus of the cleaner on Lena's cloth. Rain tapped the windows. Downstairs, a vacuum hummed far away, then stopped. Emma said nothing. She just looked at Lena, then at the photograph on the shelf, then down at the towel in her hands. There were shadows beneath her eyes. But for the first time, there was something else too. Something not yet trust, not yet ease, but close enough to make the room feel different. Lena lowered the dust cloth and kept both hands visible at her sides. That was a good place for the sun, she said softly, her voice no louder than the rain. Emma's fingers tightened around the towel. Her gaze flicked up, startled not by the words themselves, but by the fact that Lena had spoken to her as if silence were not a problem to solve. Your room gets less light in the afternoon, Lena added after a moment. I thought maybe it could help. Emma glanced toward the windows, then back at the towel. Her lips parted as though a sound might come, but none did. That was all right. Lena gave a small nod, not asking for more, and turned back to the shelf. She picked up the dust cloth again and gently polished the frame with the laughing mother and child, then set it square. When she looked over once more, Emma had stepped 2 feet farther into the room. On the small table by the chaise sat a dish of wrapped mince for guests who almost never noticed them. Emma took one, held it for a second, then crossed the room and placed it beside Lena's folded cleaning cloth with solemn care, as if returning something precious. Before Lena could thank her, footsteps clicked sharply in the hall. Claire appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, and her face hardened at once. Her eyes dropped to the towel sun in Emma's hands, then to the mint on the table, and whatever softness the rain had made possible in that room vanished like breath from glass. Claire did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The room seemed to shrink around the chill in her face. She stepped inside the sitting room with one hand still resting on the doorframe, her heels precise against the hardwood, her perfume sharp and floral enough to overpower the clean scent of polish in the air. "Emma," she said, carefully measured, the way adults speak when they want control to sound like concern. "Come away from there." The little girl did not move. She stood with the towel sun pressed lightly against her cardigan and kept her eyes lowered, first to the mint on the table, then to the hem of Lena's apron. For one fragile second, it looked as though she might stay. Claire noticed that too, and something unreadable flickered across her features before her mouth settled into a smile that carried no warmth at all. "I said come away from there." Lena placed the dust cloth on the table beside the mint and stepped back at once, giving the room more space than anyone had asked for. "She was only standing here, ma'am," Lena said softly. "I know exactly what she was doing," Claire replied, cutting across her without looking at her. Then at last she did look, and the air changed. It was the same look she had given in the foyer that morning, except now it had an edge of alarm beneath the contempt, because the child who ignored everyone had crossed a room for the woman no one respected. "You need to remember your position," Claire said. "You are here to clean, not to insert yourself into family matters." Lena kept her hands open at her sides. "Yes, ma'am." The answer seemed to irritate Claire even more, perhaps because it offered no argument to strike against. Emma's fingers tightened around the towel sun. Her small shoulders lifted, then stilled. Rain traced slow silver lines down the windows behind them. Somewhere downstairs a phone rang once and stopped. Claire took 2 steps farther into the room and crouched beside Emma with the kind of practiced grace that looked maternal from a distance. "Sweetheart," she said, smoothing the child's sleeve. "You do not have to take things from staff, all right? It confuses boundaries." Emma turned her face slightly away. Not dramatic, not defiant, just enough. Claire froze for the smallest moment, then rose again with her composure perfectly restored. "Put that towel down," she said. Emma did not. Lena felt her heartbeat once, hard and low, but her expression did not change. "It is just folded linen, ma'am," she said quietly. "I left it because she sounded upset." Claire let out a soft laugh, empty as glass. "How generous of you to decide what my niece needs." She moved to the side table, picked up the peppermint Emma had left for Lena, and held it between 2 polished fingers as though it proved something ugly. "And this? What exactly is this supposed to be? Some game? Some attempt to make her dependent on you?" "No, ma'am." Lena's voice stayed calm, but inside it something old was tightening, something familiar and tired. "She offered it. I did not ask her for anything." Claire set the mint back down with a tiny click. "That is not the point." She turned toward the hall and called for Mrs. Holloway, the head housekeeper, who appeared less than a minute later with concern already gathered in the lines around her mouth. Claire did not waste time. From now on, Lena will have no duties on the 2nd floor unless specifically assigned and supervised. Emma needs stability, not improvisation. Mrs. Holloway glanced at Lena, then at the child still holding the soft white sun, and something like discomfort crossed her face. "Mrs. Whitmore, I am not sure that is necessary." "I am," Claire said. Her tone was gentle, final, the kind that ended conversations before they could become truth. Mrs. Holloway lowered her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." No one spoke after that. Not Claire. Not Mrs. Holloway. Not Lena. The only sound was the rain, and the low hum of the air vents above the windows. Lena bent, lifted her cleaning cloth, and reached for her card in the hallway. She did not look directly at Emma as she passed, but in the reflection of the glass cabinet near the door, she saw the little girl standing exactly where she had been, towel sun against her chest, watching her go with a stillness that felt heavier than tears. By early evening the house had settled into a colder kind of order, the kind built not on peace, but on obedience. Lena spent the next 3 hours downstairs where Claire wanted her, far from the second-floor hallway, far from the small bedroom with the closed white door, far from the child who had crossed a room for a folded towel and a peppermint. She polished the brass rail along the back staircase, restocked hand soap in the powder room off the music parlor, and wiped fingerprints from the glass doors overlooking the terrace while rain slid down them in long, blurred ribbons. Outside, the gardens had gone dark beneath the storm. Inside, lamps clicked on one by one, casting pools of amber light across stone, silk, and polished wood. The estate looked beautiful in the way expensive places always did, and empty in the way grief always made them. In the kitchen, staff spoke in practical voices over the hum of refrigerators and the steady rush of the industrial sink. Mrs. Holloway gave Lena a stack of fresh napkins to press and did not mention the upstairs restriction again, which somehow made it feel more official. No one was cruel. No one was kind either. The quiet itself became its own kind of sentence. Lena stood at the pressing board in the service pantry, smoothing linen beneath the hot iron, watching steam lift and vanish into the yellow light. Her hands moved by habit. Fold, press, turn, stack. But her mind kept drifting upward, past the ceiling, past the chandeliers, past the rooms she was no longer allowed to enter. She wondered whether Emma had kept the towel sun or hidden it or dropped it somewhere under the bed once adults had turned everything tender into something suspicious. She wondered whether the child had eaten dinner. She wondered whether Daniel knew what Claire had done, and if he did, whether he had said nothing because silence was easier than conflict. Around 7:30 the house chef sent up a tray for Daniel, grilled salmon, wild rice, green beans, all arranged with the precision of people who believed neatness could fix a life. Lena carried the tray only as far as the service elevator before handing it to another maid assigned upstairs. She did not ask questions. She did not look toward the security monitor beside the wall, though one of its grainy screens showed the upper landing in black and white. A narrow hall, a closed door, a slice of light beneath it. That was all. Later, when the last of the dinner dishes had been rinsed and stacked, Lena stepped out the back entrance for her 10-minute break. The rain had eased to a mist so fine it felt like breathing through cool silk. She stood beneath the overhang near the staff parking area with a paper cup of vending machine coffee warming her palms. The night smelled of wet grass, pavement, and distant pine. For the first time all day, no one was asking anything from her. No clocks chimed. No silver rang. No heels clicked across marble. Just the soft hiss of tires on the road beyond the gates, and the faint rattle of rainwater moving through the gutters. Lena took one sip of the coffee and almost smiled at how bad it was. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the small wallet she always carried, worn at the corners, soft from years of being opened carefully. Inside, tucked behind her identification card, was a photograph no bigger than a credit card. A little boy with warm brown skin and serious eyes, missing one front tooth, wearing a paper crown from a school play. Isaiah, her son at 6, on the morning he had insisted pancakes tasted better cut into stars. The overhead security light near the loading dock cast a pale glow over the photo, enough to catch the crease that ran through one corner from where she had once folded it by mistake, and cried over that too. Lena touched the image lightly with one thumb. The storm air cooled her cheeks. "I am trying," she whispered, so softly even she barely heard it. "I am still trying." Then she slid the photograph back into the wallet, lifted the paper cup again, and looked up toward the dark shape of the second-floor windows, where one room remained lit long after every other child in a peaceful house should have been asleep. By 9:30 the Whitmore estate had gone quiet in the way large houses do, with silence layered over distant sounds that only made the emptiness clearer. A dishwasher hummed somewhere below the kitchen floor. Pipes sighed in the walls. Wind moved through the trees beyond the terrace and tapped wet branches against the windows like careful knuckles. Lena had finished the last of the pantry shelves and was returning a bottle of glass cleaner to the supply closet when the lights flickered once, then steadied. A second later thunder rolled across the property, low and heavy, shaking the old window panes just enough to wake every memory the storm carried with it. She paused with one hand on the shelf. Then she heard it. Not from outside. From upstairs. A sharp cry, choked off too quickly, followed by the hurried sound of feet in the second-floor hall. Another flash of lightning briefly lit the service stairwell window, and then came Claire's voice, clipped and strained now, no longer polished. "Emma, open the door. Right now." Lena stood still. The bottle in her hand felt cold against her palm. She knew that tone. Urgent, controlled, completely wrong for a frightened child. She set the cleaner down and listened. A second voice joined Claire's. One of the younger maids sent up with warm milk and no idea what to do with a grieving little girl in a storm. She pushed the tray back out. "Ma'am. She will not let anyone in." Another crack of thunder answered for the child, and this time the cry from behind the closed door came out raw enough to turn the air thin. Lena closed the supply closet quietly. She did not think about Mrs. Holloway's instructions. She did not think about Claire's face in the sitting room. She only moved, up the back stairs and into the second-floor hall where the sconces glowed soft gold against the pale wallpaper and the carpet muted every step. Claire was standing outside Emma's bedroom in a silk blouse and pressed trousers, as if grief itself ought to keep office hours. At her feet sat the untouched tray, warm milk trembling in its glass, toast untouched, napkin still folded. The younger maid hovered near the wall, helpless. Claire turned at the sound of footsteps and disbelief hardened her features. "What are you doing up here?" she demanded. Lena stopped a few feet away, breath steady, hands empty. "I heard her crying." "That does not concern you." Another bolt of lightning flashed white through the tall end window. Emma made a small strangled sound behind the door, then began crying in earnest, not loud, but fast and broken, the way panic sounds when it is running out of space to hide. Claire took a step toward the door again. "Emma, if you do not stop this right now, please do not," Lena said. She spoke softly, but the words landed anyway. Claire turned on her with open fury. "Excuse me." Lena looked at the closed bedroom door, not at Claire. She is already scared. She does not need another storm. For 1 second nobody moved. Rain hissed against the glass at the end of the hall. From downstairs came the faint drone of Daniel's voice on a late call, unaware of the unraveling above him. Claire's mouth parted, more stunned by being interrupted than by what had been said. "You are out of line." "Probably," Lena answered, still calm. "But she is still crying." Then, before Claire could stop her, Lena crossed the hall and lowered herself to the carpet just outside Emma's bedroom door. Not touching the knob, not asking to come in, just sitting with her back against the wall and her knees drawn slightly up, making herself smaller, quieter, safer. She kept her hands where they could be seen and looked at the strip of light beneath the door. "Emma," she said, her voice almost lost under the rain. "You do not have to open the door. I am just going to sit here for a minute." No answer came. Only trembling breath on the other side of the wood. Lena waited, then began to hum. So softly it was barely more than breath shaped into melody, an old tune her son used to ask for on bad weather nights. Simple and low and warm as lamplight. The crying did not stop right away, but it changed. It slowed just enough to listen. The hallway held its breath around that small, fragile sound. Lena kept humming, low and even, never loud enough to demand attention, only steady enough to give fear something gentler, to lean on. Thunder rolled again beyond the windows, farther away this time, more tired than angry, and the rain softened from a hard rush to a softer, steady fall. Claire stood 3 feet away with all her impatience gathered into the set of her shoulders. Twice she started to speak and stopped, as though the sight of a cleaner sitting on the carpet outside a closed bedroom door had offended some deeper law of the house than any broken rule ever could. The younger maid near the wall did not move at all. She looked from Claire to Lena to the thin line of light under Emma's door and seemed to understand, without needing words, that one wrong sound would break whatever small bridge was forming there. Lena finished the tune and let the quiet rest for a moment. Then she spoke to the door in the same tone people use near sleeping babies and church candles. "When my little boy was scared of storms," she said, eyes on the carpet, "he used to count between the lightning and the thunder. He said if he knew when the sound was coming, it felt less like being chased." She smiled faintly to herself, not for anyone in the hall, but for a memory only she could see. He was almost always wrong. He would count too fast. Then he would laugh because the storm did not follow his rules. On the other side of the door, Emma's breathing caught. then slowed. Not calm yet, but listening. Another flash brightened the hall for half a second, silver in the mirrors, white along the edges of the brass sconces. Lena counted softly under her breath. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The thunder came on 4. Inside the room, no crying followed. Claire shifted her weight. This is absurd, she whispered, though less sharply now. Lena did not answer. She only kept her gaze lowered and waited. A minute passed. Then 2. The entire second floor seemed suspended in that waiting. The rain, the lamp glow, the polished hush of old money and old grief. And then there came the smallest sound of all, almost nothing, the delicate scrape of something being moved across carpet. Everyone in the hall heard it. The strip of light beneath Emma's door darkened for a second, then brightened again as a folded piece of paper slid slowly into view. It stopped inches from Lena's knee. She looked at it, but she did not reach for it right away. Claire stared as if the paper itself were speaking. At last Lena picked it up with careful fingers and unfolded it. Inside was a page torn from the same sketch pad she had seen in the sunroom. Gray clouds pressed hard into the paper with crayon, a crooked little house beneath them, and in the corner, drawn larger now, a yellow sun with too many rays stretching out in every direction. Nothing else. No words. No names. But Lena's throat tightened anyway. That is beautiful, she said softly to the door. Silence answered. But it was a different silence now, one with breath in it. Lena folded the page once and laid it on the carpet beside her instead of keeping it. A few seconds later, the doorknob turned. Just a fraction. The door opened no more than 2 inches, enough for warm lamplight to spill into the hall, and enough for a small pale hand to appear at the edge, still holding the little towel sun from earlier. Lena did not move closer. She simply turned her own hand over on the carpet, palm open, not touching, not asking, just there. After one trembling second, Emma placed the folded towel into Lena's palm and left her hand there for the briefest moment before slipping it back inside. At the far end of the hall, unnoticed by everyone except the younger maid, Daniel had stepped out of the study and gone completely still. Daniel did not announce himself. He stood at the far end of the hallway in the half-shadow outside his study, one hand still resting on the doorframe, tie loosened just enough to suggest the hour had worn him down. For a long second, he simply watched the scene before him as though the house had shifted into a language he had never learned, and somehow the quiet woman on the carpet was the only one who spoke it. Emma's door remained open those 2 careful inches. Warm lamplight spilled across the runner rug. Lena sat with the child's drawing beside one knee and the folded towel sun resting in her open hand, her posture loose and patient, not triumphant, not even surprised, only present in the exact way the moment required. Claire was the first to notice Daniel. Her chin lifted at once, ready with explanation, defense, control. Daniel, this is precisely what I was trying to prevent, she said in a hushed voice that still managed to sound accusing. She ignored direct instructions and involved herself again. Daniel did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the narrow opening in Emma's door, on the tiny hand that had disappeared back inside, on the paper with the yellow sun, on Lena sitting in a $5,000 hallway, as if none of the marble or money mattered as much as the crying child behind the wood. When he finally spoke, his voice came out low and rough around the edges. Prevent what? Claire blinked. This confusion. This attachment. She is staff. The younger maid near the wall lowered her eyes further. The rain whispered against the end window. Somewhere downstairs the grandfather clock marked the quarter hour with a muted chime that seemed to come from another world. Daniel took a few slow steps forward. Emma opened the door, he said. Claire folded her arms, brittle again. 2 inches. Because she was distressed and impressionable. Daniel stopped beside the tray on the floor, looked at the untouched milk, the cold toast, the napkin still perfectly folded by someone who had followed instructions and reached no one. Then he looked at Lena. Did you ask her to do that? Lena rose carefully to her feet, keeping one respectful step back from the doorway. No, sir, she said. I only sat with her. After being told not to go upstairs, Claire added. Daniel turned toward his sister-in-law at last, and whatever Claire expected to find in his face was not there. There was no gratitude, no patience, not even anger in the usual polished sense. Just a tired clarity that made the hallway feel suddenly honest. My daughter has refused every therapist, every tutor, every guest, every person who has tried to reach her in this house for 11 months, he said. Tonight, she slid a drawing under the door and opened it with her own hand. Claire's mouth tightened. You are letting sentiment cloud judgment. Daniel glanced once more at the drawing on the floor. The yellow crayon rays were uneven, too hard in places, too light in others. A child had pressed hope into paper without trusting words yet. Maybe judgment has been the problem, he said. Quietly. The sentence landed harder than any raised voice could have. Claire looked away first. Daniel bent and picked up the sketch gently, as if it were breakable, then straightened and held it for a moment beneath the hallway light. His thumb brushed the bright yellow corner. Something in his face gave way, not fully, not enough for tears, but enough for the man beneath the schedule and the title to show through. When he spoke again, it was not to Claire. It was not even to the staff. It was to the almost open door. Emma, he said softly, the way fathers speak when they are afraid hope might hear them and vanish. He waited. Nothing happened. Then, from inside the room, so faint that everyone in the hall leaned toward it without meaning to, came the smallest sound of movement followed by a single tap from the other side of the door, once, deliberate, like an answer. The tap on the other side of the door was tiny, almost fragile, but it struck the hallway harder than thunder ever could. No one moved at first. Claire stood with her lips pressed into a thin, pale line, as if the child had chosen the wrong person to answer, and therefore the answer could not be real. The younger maid near the wall blinked quickly and looked down at her shoes. Lena kept her hands still at her sides, the towel sun now folded softly in one palm, her face calm in the golden light. Daniel remained where he was for a long second, holding the drawing with the yellow sun as though he had forgotten how to breathe. Then the bedroom door opened another inch. Just enough for more warm light to spill across the carpet. Just enough for everyone in the hall to understand that whatever had happened here had not happened by force, or strategy, or command. It had happened because someone had chosen patience over pride. Daniel stepped closer, slowly, like a man approaching something sacred, and afraid his own grief might frighten it away. Emma, he said again, even softer this time. It is okay. The door did not open wider, but it did not close. That alone felt like mercy. Daniel looked at Lena then, really looked at her, not as part of the staff moving through the house with polished trays and quiet shoes, but as a person standing in the center of something his money had not been able to fix. There was rain on the far window, yellow light on the walls, a silver tray cooling on the floor, and in the middle of it all a cleaner who had broken the rules and somehow restored something more important than order. How did you know what to do? He asked. Claire made a faint sound of disbelief, as if even the question were inappropriate. Lena lowered her eyes for a moment, and when she answered, her voice carried none of the drama the hallway seemed to expect. I did not know exactly, sir, she said. I only knew not to make fear feel ashamed for being fear. Daniel stared at her. The words seemed to land somewhere deeper than the moment itself. That is not something people just know, he said. Lena's fingers tightened once around the towel sun, then eased. For a second the overhead light caught the wear along the edge of her apron pocket, the faint outline of the wallet still tucked there, the place where memory lived close to her body all day long. Mrs. Holloway had come up silently from the back stairs during the commotion and now stood at the far end of the hall with her hands clasped. She looked from Daniel to Lena, hesitated, then spoke with the quiet caution of someone stepping into a truth that should have been told earlier. Her son used to be frightened of storms too, sir, she said. The whole hallway seemed to still again. Daniel's gaze shifted, puzzled. Mrs. Holloway swallowed. Lena lost him 3 years ago. Leukemia. Claire's face changed first, not into kindness, but into discomfort, the stiff kind that comes when cruelty suddenly has a witness. Daniel did not speak. He simply looked at Lena, and for the first time all day there was nothing guarded in his expression, no boardroom calm, no practiced authority. Only sorrow meeting sorrow, and realizing one of them had been carrying a mop bucket while the other had been carrying a company. Lena did not explain further. She did not offer the story up for tenderness or pity. She only said, very quietly, he used to like when I counted between the lightning and the thunder. It made the dark feel smaller. Behind the door, Emma shifted again. Then, clear enough that no one could pretend they had imagined it, came a little voice from inside the room. hoarse with crying and rusted from disuse. Again, the word was barely louder than the rain, but it changed everything. Claire drew in a breath as if the air itself had surprised her. Mrs. Holloway closed her eyes for half a second and pressed her hands together. The younger maid at the wall looked up so fast her expression opened like a window. And Daniel Whitmore, a man who had spent a year listening for a voice that never came, stood in the soft hallway light with his daughter's drawing in one hand and seemed to forget the shape of the world around him. Lena did not rush toward the door. She did not fill the silence with questions or praise or the kind of adult astonishment that might have made a child retreat from her own courage. She only lowered herself back down to the carpet, careful and quiet, and let the moment breathe. "All right," she said gently. Again, another flash brightened the end window, white along the brass frames and the polished floorboards, and this time Lena counted with a warmth that turned the numbers into something safer than weather. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Thunder answered on 4, softened now by distance. From behind the door came no cry, only the sound of a small breath being let out. Lena hummed the tune again, low and simple, and the door opened a little wider, enough for one eye, then half a face, then Emma herself to appear in the narrow space between fear and trust. Her hair was mussed from the pillow. Her cheeks were damp. One sleeve of her cardigan was twisted. But she was there, standing barefoot in the light of her room, looking not at Claire, not at her father, but at Lena. The towel sun was no longer in Lena's hand. It had somehow ended up tucked under Emma's arm again, as if the child had claimed it while no one was looking. Daniel took one slow step forward, but stopped when Emma's gaze flickered. He had learned enough in 1 minute to know that love did not always move by advancing. Sometimes it moved by staying still. Lena tipped her head slightly toward the open doorway. "You were very brave," she said. Emma blinked, then looked down at the carpet. Her mouth moved once before any sound came. "Loud," she whispered, the word brittle from disuse. Lena nodded as though they were discussing ordinary weather, not a miracle unfolding in a $1,000,000 hallway. "Yes," she said. "Storms can be loud." Emma looked at her again. "You counted." It was not a question. It was a child placing one truth beside another, seeing if they fit. "I did," Lena said. Sometimes counting reminds the dark that it does not get to be everything. Daniel closed his eyes for one heartbeat and opened them again, and there was no hiding what stood in them now. Claire looked away first. Her posture remained perfect, but something in it had gone hollow. The polished certainty she wore like jewelry all day had cracked under the sound of a child choosing the woman she had dismissed. No one called attention to it. No one needed to. Emma opened the door wider still, enough for lamplight to reach Lena's shoes, enough for Daniel to see the scattered crayons on the rug inside, the blanket kicked aside, the white towel folded and unfolded a dozen times beside the bed. Then, with the caution of someone stepping onto a frozen pond and hoping it might hold, Emma lifted her free hand and reached it out toward Lena. She did not speak again. She did not need to. Lena rose slowly and took only one step forward, stopping close enough for Emma to decide the rest. And when the little girl placed her hand in Lena's, the whole house seemed to fall silent around the soundless truth of it. No one in the hallway spoke for several seconds after Emma's hand settled into Lena's. The child's fingers were small and cool, still uncertain, but they did not pull away. Lena did not tighten her grip. She only let her hand remain steady, an answer rather than a claim. Behind them the rain eased against the windows, the storm moving farther across the dark Connecticut hills, leaving the house wrapped in a softer hush than it had known in months. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment, and when he looked up again something in his face had changed. The hard, polished distance he wore for boardrooms and cameras was still there in outline, but it no longer reached his eyes. He looked at his daughter, then at Lena, then at the open bedroom door, and the truth of the evening stood plain between them all. Money had bought him doctors, specialists, private tutors, a mansion full of careful rooms, and expensive quiet. But it had not bought this. It had not bought the one thing standing in front of him now. Simple and almost unbearably human, a child choosing safety, because someone had offered it without demanding anything in return. Claire shifted beside the wall, the first movement she had made in almost a minute. "Daniel," she began, her voice low and guarded. "I was only trying to protect Emma." Daniel turned toward her, not sharply, not cruelly, but with a calm that made the hallway feel suddenly honest. "No," he said. "You were trying to manage her." Claire went still. The sentence was quiet, but it left no room to hide in. He drew a slow breath and looked back at Emma, whose hand was still in Lena's, towel sun tucked beneath her arm, damp lashes catching the light from her bedroom. "Protection listens," he said. "Control does not." Claire's mouth parted, then closed again. For once she had no polished answer ready. Mrs. Holloway lowered her gaze. The younger maid at the wall blinked hard and looked away, as if privacy were the last kindness left to give. Daniel stepped forward only when Emma's expression did not change. He stopped a few feet from the doorway and crouched slowly, bringing himself closer to her height. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice worn thin with wonder and regret. "I am sorry it took me so long to understand what you needed." Emma looked at him for a moment, silent again, but not shut away. That alone was enough to make his throat tighten. Lena felt it in the way his next breath caught. Emma's fingers loosened slightly in Lena's hand, then tightened once more, as if giving herself courage from borrowed warmth. Daniel glanced up at Lena. "Would you stay with her for a while?" he asked. It was a simple question, but everyone in the hall heard what lived inside it. Not an order, not an assumption, a request. Lena hesitated only long enough to make sure the choice belonged to Emma. The little girl answered first. She gave the smallest nod and stepped backward into the room. Without letting go, Lena followed at the pace Emma set, one quiet step at a time, until the child was sitting on the edge of the bed with the towel sun in her lap and lamplight warming the side of her face. The room smelled faintly of lavender detergent and rain-damp air. Crayons were scattered near the rug. The yellow one lay closest to the bed. Lena sat in the chair beside the nightstand, not too near, and began counting again whenever thunder rolled faintly in the distance. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. By the time she reached 4, Emma's shoulders had lowered. By the third round, the little girl had curled beneath her blanket with the towel sun tucked beneath her chin. By the fourth, her eyes had drifted closed. Daniel remained in the doorway the entire time, one hand resting against the frame, watching as if he were afraid the scene might vanish if he moved too quickly. Claire had already gone downstairs without another word. The house seemed to notice her absence and grow quieter still. Much later, when Emma was asleep and the storm had passed for good, Lena rose carefully from the chair and adjusted the blanket near the child's shoulder. She turned to leave, but Daniel stepped aside only halfway, stopping her in the soft spill of bedroom light. "Lena," he said. She looked up. He held Emma's drawing in one hand, the yellow sun bright even in the late hour. "I owe you more than an apology for what was said to you in this house." Lena's face remained gentle, tired, unreadable in the kindest way. "You do not owe me anything for being kind to a child, sir," she said. Daniel's expression shifted, not with disagreement, but with the shame of a man realizing decency had entered his home wearing a faded name tag, and he had almost let it pass unnoticed. "Then I owe you for not seeing you sooner," he said. Lena did not answer right away. Her eyes moved past him to the sleeping girl, to the towel sun peeking out from beneath Emma's chin, to the room that no longer felt locked from the inside. "Sometimes people see when they are ready," she said softly. The next morning the house woke to clear weather and a pale gold light that spilled clean across the east windows, across polished floors, across the breakfast room, where one small place setting waited again. Lena had returned to work early, moving through the quiet with her cart and fresh cloths, the scent of lemon polish and coffee rising with the day. She was straightening the chairs in the breakfast room when she heard footsteps in the hall, light and quick, followed by a second, slower pair. She turned. Emma stood in the doorway in the same navy cardigan, hair brushed this time, one hand wrapped around Daniel's. In her other arm, she carried the towel sun, now folded more carefully than before. Father and daughter paused there together in the morning light. Daniel said nothing. He did not need to. Emma looked at Lena for a long moment, then crossed the room on her own small feet and held the towel out toward her. Lena knelt, accepting it with both hands as though it were something precious. Emma studied her face, solemn and brave. Then, very softly, as if testing whether joy still fit in her mouth, the little girl smiled. It was not a big smile. It did not need to be. It was enough to change the room. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second and let out a breath that sounded like the end of a long winter. Lena smiled back, the same quiet smile she had carried through insult, through silence, through all the rooms where people had mistaken gentleness for weakness. Sunlight spread across the breakfast table, catching the blue ribbon on